As the Leigh Light spread across more squadrons, the impact on the Battle of the Atlantic became profound and undeniable. German U-boat commanders, once confident in the protective shroud of night, suddenly found their most reliable sanctuary turned into a deadly trap. Surfacing to recharge batteries or sprint ahead of convoys now carried an unacceptable risk. Reports from surviving crews described a terrifying phenomenon: total darkness one moment, then an overwhelming flood of light the next, as if the sky itself had opened up. In those brief seconds of illumination, deck crews stood exposed, unable to reach the conning tower hatch or man their guns before depth charges rained down. Admiral Karl Donitz, the architect of Germany's submarine campaign, received urgent messages from his captains pleading for new orders. By late summer 1942, he issued a drastic directive: U-boats were to avoid surfacing at night whenever possible, even if it meant running batteries critically low or enduring stifling conditions below decks. This shift handed the initiative back to the Allies. The change in tactics came at a heavy cost for the Germans. Daytime surfacing exposed U-boats to a growing array of threats. Allied convoys increasingly received air cover from escort carriers and long-range aircraft. Radar-equipped destroyers and corvettes patrolled more aggressively, while land-based fighters from bases in Iceland, Newfoundland, and the Azores extended their reach. Centimetric radar, a newer British innovation operating on shorter wavelengths, made it harder for U-boats to detect incoming aircraft early enough to dive. Trapped between nocturnal lights and diurnal hunters, Donitz's wolf packs fragmented. Coordinated attacks grew rarer, and individual boats became more cautious, reducing their overall effectiveness. Shipping losses, which had peaked at over 700,000 tons in some months earlier in the year, began a steady decline. By the end of 1942, the monthly tonnage dropped significantly, giving Britain vital breathing room to rebuild its merchant fleet and stockpile resources. Wing Commander Humphrey Lee, now leading 172 Squadron, became the driving force behind the Leigh Light's rapid adoption. He personally trained pilots in the precise techniques required for success, approaching at low altitude with engines throttled back for minimal noise, maintaining strict radio silence, and timing the light's activation to the exact moment when escape was impossible for the submarine. Crews practiced endlessly on dummy runs over the English Channel, perfecting the 3-second window that separated failure from a confirmed kill. Lee emphasized discipline and patience. Rushing the approach or switching on the light too early could alert the enemy and waste the element of surprise. Under his command, 172 Squadron transformed from a standard patrol unit into an elite U-boat hunting force. Other squadrons soon followed, equipping their Wellingtons, Liberators, and even some Catalinas with the device. By early 1943, hundreds of aircraft across RAF Coastal Command, the Royal Canadian Air Force, and even U.S. Navy patrol squadrons carried Leigh Lights. One of the most remarkable demonstrations of the technology's power came during the intense convoy battles of spring 1943. In March and April, Donitz launched a final major offensive, committing nearly 50 U-boats to intercept convoys HX-229 and SC-122 in the mid-Atlantic air gap, a region previously beyond reliable air cover. The battles were ferocious, with wolf packs sinking dozens of ships in brutal weather. Yet, Leigh Light-equipped aircraft, operating from extended-range bases, intervened decisively at night. Pilots illuminated and attacked multiple U-boats attempting to close on the convoys after dark. Several submarines were sunk outright, while others were damaged and forced to abort their patrols. The losses disrupted German coordination, allowing many merchant ships to escape. Historians later marked this period as the turning point. May 1943 became known as Black May for the Kriegsmarine, with 43 U-boats destroyed, the highest monthly total of the war. Donitz temporarily withdrew his fleet from the North Atlantic, acknowledging that the tactical advantage had shifted irretrievably. The Leigh Light's influence extended beyond immediate kills. It forced ongoing innovations in German countermeasures, diverting resources from offensive operations. U-boats received enhanced anti-aircraft guns for surface defense, radar warning receivers to detect ASV emissions, and even experimental snorkels, breathing tubes allowing limited battery recharge while submerged. These adaptations helped prolong the campaign, but they reduced speed, endurance, and crew comfort, making patrols less efficient. Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park, reading decrypted Enigma messages, noted increasing frustration among U-boat commanders. Reports spoke of crews suffering from exhaustion due to prolonged submersion, and morale plummeted as the Bay of Biscay earned the grim nickname Valley of Death among German sailors. Individual stories from Allied aircrews highlight the human element behind the statistics. Take Flying Officer Kenneth Owen Moore, a young Canadian serving in a Liberator squadron. On the night following D-Day in June 1944, Moore patrolled the English Channel approaches to shield the massive Normandy invasion fleet from U-boat interference. His radar detected a contact shortly after midnight. Executing a textbook Leigh Light approach, he flooded U-441 with light at close range and released a pattern of depth charges that sent the submarine plunging to the bottom in under 2 minutes. Barely 20 minutes later, radar pinged another target. Moore repeated the maneuver, illuminating U-413 and destroying it in a massive explosion visible for miles. Landing back at base, he logged a simple entry: 2 submarines sighted, both sunk. For this double kill on a single sortie, Moore earned high decorations from both Britain and the United States, embodying the confidence and precision the Leigh Light instilled in its operators. As the war progressed, the device evolved. Later versions integrated with centimetric radar for even greater accuracy, and some aircraft mounted twin lights for broader coverage. By 1945, over 1,800 Allied planes carried variants of the Leigh Light, contributing directly to the destruction of more than 200 U-boats, roughly a quarter of all German submarine losses in the Atlantic. Combined with other advancements like Hedgehog mortars, improved sonar, and liberated escort groups freed from convoy duties, it helped seal the Allies' dominance at sea. The threat that had once brought Britain to the edge of starvation vanished, allowing uninterrupted supply lines that sustained the massive buildup for Overlord and the final push into Europe. Yet, for all its impact, the Leigh Light remained one of the war's quieter triumphs. Classified during the conflict to preserve its surprise value, it received little public acclaim. Humphrey Lee himself sought no spotlight. Promoted steadily through the ranks, he continued serving in Coastal Command, overseeing further developments in anti-submarine warfare. After the war, he rose to Air Commodore before retiring in 1952. He turned down interviews, book deals, and speaking engagements, insisting the credit belonged to the aircrews who flew dangerous patrols night after night. When asked years later about his invention, Lee modestly described it as providing a better way to see in the dark. He passed away in 1980 at age 83, his contributions largely unknown outside specialist circles. It wasn't until decades later that the full story emerged. Declassified documents, veteran memoirs, and historical analyses revealed how one man's quiet determination overcame institutional skepticism and technical dogma. Lee had no advanced degree, no powerful patrons, and initially no authorization, only observations from countless patrols and an unwillingness to accept impossible as final. His persistence challenged the notion that innovation requires official sanction or elite credentials. In an era dominated by massive scientific projects like the Manhattan Project or radar development at MIT, the Leigh Light stood as a reminder that individual insight, applied practically, could alter the course of history. Today, the legacy endures in subtle ways. Modern anti-submarine warfare builds on the principles Lee pioneered: surprise illumination, precise targeting, and integration of sensors with weapons. Museums preserve prototypes, and aviation historians celebrate it as a pivotal innovation. More importantly, it saved hundreds of thousands of lives: merchant sailors who reached port safely, soldiers supplied for victory, and civilians spared the horrors of blockade-induced famine. In the grand narrative of World War II, amid tales of epic battles and famous leaders, this story whispers a powerful truth. Sometimes, the greatest victories begin with someone refusing to turn off the light in the face of darkness. As the Leigh Light rapidly equipped more aircraft across Allied squadrons, its effect rippled far beyond the Bay of Biscay, reshaping the entire Battle of the Atlantic into a contest the Germans could no longer win. U-boat captains, who had grown accustomed to ruling the night, now faced a weapon that stripped away their greatest advantage in an instant. Survivors' accounts painted vivid pictures of the terror. One moment, a submarine cruised confidently on the surface, stars reflecting off gentle waves. The next, a blinding white glare erupted from the sky, pinning every man on deck like insects under glass. Guns remained unmanned, hatches unreachable, as depth charges plummeted with deadly precision. Those few seconds of frozen exposure were all an experienced crew needed to deliver a killing blow. Word spread quickly through the Kriegsmarine. Crews began calling the mysterious beam Das Licht des Todes, the light of death. Morale, already strained by long patrols in cramped conditions, began to crack. Admiral Karl Donitz, watching kill reports mount from his headquarters in France, had no choice but to adapt. In August 1942, he issued new standing orders. Night surfacing was restricted to absolute emergencies. Batteries must be recharged during daylight when possible, even though it exposed boats to air patrols and convoy escorts. The change sounded simple, but it fundamentally disrupted the Wolfpack system that had made U-boats so lethal. Without nighttime freedom, submarines could no longer dash ahead of convoys at high speed to set up coordinated attacks. They lost the ability to regroup after scattering from escorts. Patrol endurance shortened as crews endured longer submerged periods in foul air. Exhaustion set in, error rates rose, and efficiency plummeted. Donitz poured resources into countermeasures, fitting heavier anti-aircraft batteries, developing radar detectors called METOCs, and rushing experimental snorkel tubes into limited service, but each solution carried trade-offs that further hampered offensive capability. On the Allied side, confidence soared. Coastal Command's kill rate, once measured in single digits per year, exploded. In the second half of 1942 alone, Leigh Light aircraft accounted for dozens of confirmed sinkings and many more damaged boats forced to limp home. Squadrons operating from bases in Devon, Cornwall, Northern Ireland, and Iceland extended their reach, closing the infamous Mid-Atlantic air gap piece by piece. Long-range Consolidated Liberators and short Sunderlands joined Wellingtons in carrying the light, while American squadrons flying from Newfoundland and the Azores adopted the technology with enthusiasm. Cooperation between the RAF, Royal Canadian Air Force, and U.S. Navy grew seamless, sharing tactics, maintenance tips, and intelligence. Ultra-decrypts from Bletchley Park, revealing U-boat positions in real time, combined devastatingly with the ability to strike at night. A detected boat could no longer hide in darkness, it became a target waiting to be illuminated. The spring of 1943 brought the decisive test. Donitz, determined to strangle Allied supply lines before American industrial output overwhelmed the Axis, committed almost his entire operational fleet to the North Atlantic. In March, Wolfpack savaged convoys HX-229 and SC-122, sinking 22 ships in a matter of days during storms that grounded most aircraft. For a moment, it seemed the old nightmare might return. Yet even in those brutal conditions, Leigh Light patrols scored hits when weather briefly cleared, disrupting attacks and forcing U-boats to scatter. As April turned to May, the balance tipped irreversibly. Very long-range aircraft, Hedgehog-armed escorts, and escort carriers entered service in numbers, but the Leigh Light remained the nocturnal hammer that prevented any return to 1941-style massacres. May 1943 became Black May for the Kriegsmarine. 43 U-boats lost, many to air attack, with crews destroyed or captured at rates the service could not sustain. Donitz withdrew his boats from the main convoy routes, admitting in his war diary that the Atlantic campaign had become untenable. Individual acts of bravery under the Leigh Light became legendary within Coastal Command. One standout was Flight Lieutenant Norman Merrington, an Australian who initially doubted the device during training. On a stormy August night in 1943, Merrington's Wellington detected U-669 off the coast of Spain. Battling turbulence that made low-level approach treacherous, he held course in darkness, engines throttled to near silence. At the critical moment, the light flashed on, revealing the submarine rolling heavily in high seas. His bombardier dropped a perfect pattern, the boat erupted in flames and sank stern first. Merrington later described the sight. Men on the conning tower silhouetted against the glare, frozen for that fatal heartbeat before the charges detonated. Another memorable sortie belonged to a Royal Canadian Air Force Liberator crew led by squadron leader Clarence Bartlett. Over 2 consecutive nights in October 1943, they sank 3 U-boats, one each on outbound, patrol, and return legs, earning the crew a collective Distinguished Flying Cross and the nickname Bartlett's Butchers among grateful convoy commodores. The Light's influence reached its dramatic peak during the Normandy invasion. In June 1944, as the greatest armada in history crossed the Channel, Donitz rushed every available U-boat toward the invasion beaches, hoping to disrupt the landings. Coastal Command threw a defensive net of Leigh Light patrols across the approaches. Night after night, aircraft illuminated intruders attempting to penetrate the screen. Flying Officer Kenneth Owen Moore's double kill on D-Day +1 was only the most celebrated of many. In total, at least 15 U-boats fell to air attack during the first weeks of Overlord, most at night under sudden beams of light. The invasion fleet landed, built up, and broke out without the catastrophic interference Donitz had envisioned. The Leigh Light had helped secure the decisive campaign of the Western Front before the first tank rolled off a landing craft. By war's end, the device had evolved through several marks: slimmer housings, more reliable batteries, integration with centimetric ASV Mark III radar that was itself harder for U-boats to detect. Over 1,800 aircraft carried some version, operating from the Arctic to the Caribbean. Conservative estimates credit it with direct responsibility for more than 200 U-boat destructions, a quarter of all losses in the Atlantic, and countless others damaged or deterred. When combined with liberated escorts, Huff-Duff direction finding, and overwhelming air superiority, it transformed the ocean from a hunting ground into a killing field for the attackers. Allied shipping losses, which averaged over 500,000 tons monthly in late 1942, fell to unsustainable levels for Germany by 1944. Britain not only survived, it thrived, feeding its people and arming the final offensives that crushed the Third Reich.